Hi, I'm Jim Mitchell. I'm Vice President of Boeing Commercial Satellite Systems, a new business unit that we established a couple months ago within Boeing. Well, hosted payloads aren't new. There were government-hosted payloads on commercial platforms in Japan, in Brazil, and in Australia. What we tried to do, though, is step it up a notch effectively. What we are doing is putting more sophisticated payloads on government platforms that directly augment the U.S. government constellations. And so in that sense, it's a different type of hosted payload. The main factor that got us there is no surprise. In the current budget and economic environment, there's just not the same funds there were a few years back. And so we see customers willing to look at different ways of doing things in the current budget environment. Now, obviously, we're focused on communications, but the same principles apply to sensor payloads and other types of payloads as well. There's a long history of hosted payloads on the commercial side as well. For instance, the K-band payload we built on Anik F2, which was used by Wild Blue, is an example of a commercial hosted payload. So there are government examples, there are commercial examples. Our current focus is on the government side. We're leveraging our experience over many, many years on government missions and architectures, using the experience we got on wideband global, on MUOS, and other programs like that, UHF follow-on. We're leveraging that experience so that we can specifically design these payloads so they do augment the government constellations and are interoperable with terminals and other terrestrial infrastructure they put on the table. Having said that, obviously Boeing has a large presence in commercial aircraft, and to the extent commercial aircraft wanted to look at applications as well, obviously we'd go down that route. But right now our focus is a little bit more on the military side. There's an international market here. The first success we really had was working with Intelsat, in conjunction with Intelsat, to put together the Australian Defence Forces payload agreement, UHF agreement, a few years back. And the fundamental, thought there is many of the U.S. strategic allies use and depend on the U.S. government systems, and to the extent there's not the capacity on board that can fully service those allies, it's natural for them to think about hosted payloads that, again, augment the U.S. government constellation. We did that at UHF, in a different way. The Australians bought into the WGS constellation, buying the F6 spacecraft. So that was a different way for them to take advantage of and augment the U.S. Government capacity. So that's kind of our thought process there. Now, but from a different perspective, a lot of Boeing platforms go overseas, fighter planes and cargo planes and stuff. And their communications needs are no different than those of the U.S. government platforms, and so there's obviously a lot of commonality there. We think of it a little bit as the similar to the Satellite Industry Association. It's a bunch of different groups of companies that have different addressable markets, different strategies, compete with each other every once in a while. But they have a common goal of having hosted payloads be a little more transparent in terms of how the government buys them, in terms of how they're put into roadmaps, in terms of the budgeting process, the contracting process, and so forth. And so the goal is to make that process more effective, more transparent for the government as well, by the way, not just for industry. And then hopefully down the road, that will be good for the commercial industry, that will be good for the government.